Thank y'all for coming to this seminar on legal and ethical issues in education. We're going to talk about several issues today. First is religion in public schools. Teachers cannot endorse any prayer or meditation activities in school settings. The Bible can only be used for secular purposes. You can teach a Bible class in school, but it would have to just be, basically teaching it as literature, not as fact. And public schools may not display religious exhibits. There's 3 cases here that are related to religion in public schools. I'm just going to list them. It's Wallace versus Jeffrey, Moser versus Hawkins County Board of Education, and Lasan versus Pleasanton Unified School District. Another big issue is freedom of expression. Students may participate in protests or demonstrations that are peaceful, do not violate school rules, and do not result in destruction of school property. They also may disrupt demonstrations that disrupt the educational opportunities of others are disallowed, and students involved in demonstrations and protests cannot obstruct movement of non-protesters into, out of, or throughout the school building. Can y'all think of any issue that might create some kind of protest like that you'd have to, I guess, watch or take care of or stay on top of? Maybe something like
Prayer at the poll?
that, maybe, or maybe that stuff like goes on, been going on in Ferguson, stuff like that. If you had, we don't have a lot of that here, but
We were gonna disrupt school the other day for,
Good Friday.
Good Friday because we didn't.
right,
Dismiss them.
because we didn't dismiss earlier. Okay, that'd be something too that they could. All right. School officials may exercise control over the content of student speech in school-sponsored newspapers as long as their actions are reasonably related to valid educational purposes. And while limited review is permissible, broad censorship of student speech is not permissible. I know in our mass media class here, that could be an issue depending on what the topic was. And it would just be something that would be important for them to stay on top of. Cases related to that would be Hazelwood School District versus Coolmire and Tinker versus Des Moines Independent School District. Search and seizure, I know we have the dogs come in some. It all pertains to Fourth Amendment rights, protecting all citizens from unreasonable search and seizure. School officials and teachers need only reasonable suspicion or probable cause to initiate a search. Reasonable suspicion can be any information received from teachers or students is deemed reliable by school officials. Can y'all think of any time in your career you've had anything where you've had to initiate a search? Or you've heard of maybe a student having?
We've heard of students having it, but then sometimes it looks like stuff's been passed and we've had to
Right.
search them.
Search kit for a weapon once.
Yeah, I remember one time we had a student here get stabbed and he claimed it was a red ink pen and it was with a knife and the knife was in the bathroom. We had to go through search and all that.
There was a kid in the lunchroom a few years back too that had it was, I guess, a fake gun, but it looked just like a handgun.
Right.
And it actually dropped out of the backpack and was on the floor, and then
Yeah.
and it looked exactly like a for real gun.
Right. So, any of that can lead to reasonable search and seizure. 2 cases related to that, New Jersey versus TLO and Desolé versus Clearview Regional Board of Education. Due process rights. Students have due process rights and they should be informed of any rule violations they're accused of and be given an opportunity to respond to those. You've got 2 types of due process. You've got procedural due process that requires certain legal procedures be followed to ensure that fundamental fairness is in play and to avoid arbitrary and capricious actions by school officials, and substantive due process pertains to the student's individual or personal rights. 2 cases related to that, People versus Dukes and Board of Education of Independent School District number 92 of Pottawatomie County, versus Earls. Liability and student records. FERPA is the federal privacy law that protects the confidentiality of student records. Parents and legal guardians have the right to inspect students' records, but it should be done in the presence of school officials where they can assist them in interpreting anything that they don't understand on it and answer any questions they have. Also, non-custodial parents can inspect students' records as long as they do this with the child's welfare in mind. And students who have reached the age of 18 are enrolled in a post-secondary institution have the same rights as their parents or legal guardians. It's really important to know for counselors here, registrars, anybody like that has to deal with student records, that they maintain that privacy. Two cases related to that, Davis versus Scherer and Jackson versus Cartwright School District. Also, we got to talk about individuals with disabilities. I know that we're all familiar with the IEP process and the way that works. Individuals with Disabilities Act requires all public schools accepting federal funds to provide free, appropriate public education to students with disabilities. Schools are required to evaluate handicapped children and to create an individualized education plan or an IEP, provide them with the most appropriate education, and school staff should be aware of the possible liability claims if they do not implement a student's IEP properly. School districts may be required to provide services outside the normal school year depending on the needs of the student. I know we've had some homebound students or students like that. I know we've had, like Miss Atkins had to go to that kid's house at that time 3 or 4 years ago, it seems like, to work on some stuff.
We have one, the kids that were in the wreck this year, broken back and
Yeah.
all that, had to have that on there.
So, 3 cases on that. Honig versus Doe, S1 versus Turlington, and Stewart versus Nappy. Last thing we're going to talk about is the Alabama Educator Code of Ethics. Basically, it just outlines the guidelines for acceptable, appropriate behavior for educators in Alabama schools. It's pretty much common sense stuff, but a lot of times people don't follow that. Standard 1 is professional conduct. An educator should demonstrate conduct that follows generally recognized professional standards. Standard 2 is trustworthiness. An educator should exemplify honesty and integrity in the course of professional practice. Standard 3, unlawful acts. An educator should abide by federal, state, and local laws and statutes. Standard 4, teacher-student relationship. Educators should always maintain a professional relationship with all students, both inside and outside the classroom. I know that's one that gets a lot of folks in trouble and a lot of folks in the news all the time when they're doing things outside the classroom they shouldn't be. Standard 5, alcohol, drug, and tobacco use or possession. An educator should refrain from the use of alcohol and or tobacco during the course of professional practice and should never use illegal or unauthorized drugs. Standard 6, public funds and property. An educator entrusted with public funds and property should honor that trust with a high level of honesty, accuracy, and responsibility. Standard 7, remunerative conduct. An educator should maintain integrity with students, colleagues, parents, patrons, or businesses when accepting gifts, gratuities, favors, and additional compensation. I know they passed that deal where we can't get a Christmas gift for over $5 or something like that. I don't get any turkeys anymore. Standard 8, maintenance of confidentiality. An educator should comply with state and federal laws regarding confidentiality of student records, standardized testing material, and other information covered by confidentiality agreements. If an educator has we all have contracts, and you should fulfill all the terms and obligations detailed in the contract with the local board of education or educational agency for the duration of the contract. Basically, you shouldn't violate your contract. Here are the references. Basically, that's it. Just a brief summary on the legal and ethical issues that face us today. So, thank you for coming.